Okay. Looks like the rain kept a lot of people away and car trouble, stuff, a broken finger. This is just, we're not starting off so well, but you guys are here, and I'm glad you're here. And I got to finish this up. So now I can turn off my phone so I don't get these interrupting calls. There, we're good. So, slideshow. Beginning. I gotta make sure I got the right share. This is what we want. All right. Let the games begin. One of the points I try to make about Roman art, and especially Roman sculpture, is that it kind of moved away from the idealism that we see in classical Greek sculpture. And so classical Greek sculpture, the classical period in Greece, follow me on this, runs from 450 BCE, and they kind of give it this arbitrary ending date of 31 BCE. And so, bottom line, there's an overlap here. There's an overlap, as I talked about with the Etruscans, but there is a big overlap with Greek culture and Greek influence and Roman Empire. And so I didn't cover Hellenistic art quite so much when we were talking about chapter 5, Greece. So I thought I'd go back and show you really kind of what that era was all about. And so this. We know who did these, which is kind of an indication of the closer we get to the present, we actually, in some cases, actually know who the artists are. And these three guys, or two guys, yeah, three guys, did this. This is called Laocoon and his sons from Rome, Italy, early 1st century, marble. And so this is a sculpture that we think was done in the early 1st century Common Era. It's in that overlap time that I'm talking about. And this was lost. This particular sculpture was lost for about 1,500 years or 1,000 years, somewhere in there. We don't know what happened, but what happens in Rome after 325-ish BCE is that Rome comes under attack a lot. They're sacked often. And so a lot of times what happened when Rome was attacked, these attackers would basically, they would loot everything from Rome, everything that they could carry away, up to and including sculptures. They were really kind of big on the gold. They were really kind of big on a lot of other more portable things, but occasionally they actually took sculptures. And one thing that happened in that looting, plundering of Rome is that sometimes the attackers, they were like, this thing's like really heavy. Is it really worth dragging all the way back to Central Europe? And they leave them. And these things kind of appear all over the Italian peninsula. There's another theory about that, that's maybe in some cases these were seen as very valuable and they were buried for safekeeping. We don't really know. It's the fog of war, if you will. But at any rate, this was dug up in the 15th century, and it was astounding. It was a revelation to the artists of the early Italian Renaissance, and they marveled at this sculpture. And as you can see, it's in reasonably good shape. We see some cracks and a few pieces that are broken, like part of this snake, or excuse me, that's part of that's his hand. But what happens is that this launches a revival in Hellenistic sculpture. And so anyway, let me tell you a little bit about this, the subject of this. It's called Laocoon and His Sons. And this comes out of Greek literature. And basically, Laocoon was a priest. And he was a guy that betrayed ancient Greece by revealing to the enemies of Greece secrets about the Greek army and their plans and stuff. And so the gods of Greece punished him, said that he would die and his sons would die from an attack, I would say at the hands from, but bottom line is snakes don't have hands. But as a result of a serpent killing the three of them. And so this is really what we have. And we have this giant snake and he's wrapped around their legs. They can't get away and he's biting Laocoon. And so the emotion described here is really in line with Hellenistic ideas. This is where, like I say, we move away from the ideal, even though some of the ideal comes through, like the guy's six-pack and the anatomy and the muscles, and they even got the vein going through. It's like no body fat. Bottom line is that a lot of the idealism persists, but the emotions come through, and that's really the point of the sculpture. And let me go to the next slide here. And I got this from the Metropolitan Museum of Art of the Hellenistic Age and the Hellenistic tradition. If you want to go to the Met's website and take a look at this, this is really quite nice. And on top of which, they have a pretty fair number of Hellenistic Greek sculptures. So, what the heck is going on here? Who is this person? It's a woman. We know it's a woman. Her clothes are falling off. We know that she's an old woman. And she's got a basket. And her clothes look as though they even might be in tatters. And so this is a Hellenistic Greek sculpture. Compare that in your mind to the classical Greek sculpture that we looked at. All of these, Venus de Milo, and all of these, the scraper, the discus thrower, all of those classic Greek sculptures, the pediment sculptures, from the Parthenon. And this is, if you don't mind me using vernacular, she is a beggar woman. She is somebody who's poor and just getting by. Begs the question, why would somebody make a statue of her? In today's art, we would do that. There's a lot of artists that go and try to capture realism in that way. They try to get, even if the scenes are not pretty and they are disturbing, artists go out and do that today. That's kind of common. Not common in antiquity. You would see people in distress, but that would be, for the most part, dead soldiers. You would see the vanquished, but actually a poor woman carrying a basket, just, you don't see that before this time. And so, like I said a moment ago, this is the kind of thing that you would see in art today. And in fact, a lot of artists go and show us the darker sides of our civilization, of society. You see it all the time. And we've gotten to a point where we're actually kind of inundated with pictures of people who are starving because they don't have food. We have pictures of animals. The ASPCA fighting animal cruelty, and they show you all of these dogs that have been abused and starving. I mean, this is like part of art, but then before this time, not an appropriate subject for a sculptor to take his or her time to make something like this. I got some other examples here of Hellenistic art. The Hellenistic period. This is a dying Gaul. And Gaul was ancient France. And a lot of fierce battles were fought between the Greeks and later the Romans in this central Western European country. And so we've seen the figure of the dying Gaul in archaic Greek. We saw it in classical Greek, and it persists through the Hellenistic period. And as we progress towards the present over those centuries, it becomes much more lifelike. And we sacrifice the ideal for the emotional. And I got another dying Gaul here too, and it actually might even be the same guy. Yeah, it's the same guy. But you see, he's dying. There's no two ways about it. He's taking his final breaths. I wanted to show you this one too. It's one of my favorite ones. This guy, older guy, sitting on a stone. And as I said earlier, the Greeks were into athletic contests. That was big in their culture, and in Roman culture too, by the way. And one of the contests, very popular, was pugilism. We know that today as boxing, but boxing is actually more morphed into mixed martial arts and WWF and all of this other stuff. But bottom line, fighting as sport. They did that in ancient times, and that's what the subject is here. He is an ancient boxer, fighter, sportsman, fighter. And you can see he's old. basically in agony from all of the bumps and bruises and broken bones he suffered over his career as a pugilist. And you see, this is kind of, his hands are wrapped up, and that's a clear indicator of what this guy did, who he was. And so that is kind of what was in ancient Greek times, boxing gloves. And so another thing that happens with this is that in Hellenistic times, we start to see the emergence. This is a slight difference, but it is a difference. I told you about how sculptors, especially in marble and especially human figures, they would always have these little supports, and in some cases they would be like a big cube, rectangular something. Sometimes they would be tree stumps. Might be another thing. What happens in Hellenistic sculpture is that they start to use the stone itself as part of the sculpture. And so he's sitting on the stone, and so anyway, that was something that Renaissance artist figured out. So anyway, I got a head of a Republican priest. We talked about this the other day. Not idealized, but more realistic. And we talked about this guy too. Funerary relief of a vegetable vendor. Again, more like everyday people, more real, if you will, than things that we've seen today, which has been more like deity, gods, royalty, kings, emperors, pharaohs, so on. And so anyway, that's really the continuum between Hellenistic Greek, late Greek sculpture and what happens in Roman sculpture. And as I was saying earlier, when the Renaissance artists started finding all of this Hellenistic Greek sculpture, it was like a revelation. This is a sculptor from the Renaissance. You may know him as a Ninja Turtle. Donatello, one of the early Renaissance great sculptors of the Italian Renaissance. And here he is, and he's got this statue of Mary Magdalene, kind of fills both buckets, if you will. Obviously, Mary Magdalene is a very important figure in Christianity, but it's also in this realism that she's very, very sorrowful, and she's wearing ragged clothes. And all of this is created so that we can get an idea of what she went through as a close confidant and friend, and some argue wife of Jesus. And so anyway, I'm not going to argue that point here, but bottom line is that she was one of the people who was there at the crucifixion. And we'll talk about some of that a little later, because we're going to get into Christian art. Here is an old market woman, Roman copy of a marble statue. Oh, I got that. Sleeping satyr. As I was talking about, the idea of putting the actual stone as part of the sculpture. And this is, 3rd century, common BCE, before Common Era, and Greek. Hellenistic Greek. And it says from Rome, but bottom line is, like I say, there's a lot of interchange. Here's Michelangelo, and these are sculptures that he produced. We're not sure if they were unfinished or not. There are some people that think that this is the way they were to be, that they were completed. I said put unfinished sculptures. But bottom line is that Michelangelo, the great sculptor of the High Renaissance, doing the same thing, influenced by Hellenistic Greek sculptures, and 1,500 years later. And I put this in. This looks like classical Greek sculpture. Sometimes emulating the ancients doesn't always quite work out. George Washington, also known as Enthroned Washington, the huge marble sculpture by Horatio Green, now commissioned by the United States Congress in 1832, the 100th anniversary of Washington's birth, completed in 1840. It was exhibited in the rotunda of the United States Capitol and then moved to the Capitol's East Lawn in 1843. Since 1964, it's been in the Museum of American History. So, this is George Washington, classical Greek sculpture. It says Washington enthroned. There have been people that titled this George Washington as Zeus, the highest Greek god. So how do you think people responded to this? We have all of this neo-classical architecture all over Washington, D.C. Supreme Court looks like the Parthenon from the front, and so on. Any ideas how this went over? Well, it's always been an issue, aside from architecture. When we start doing monuments and we start doing sculptures, there will be, and it still would be the case today, I'm sure. This was very controversial in its time because this was seen as pre-Christian, or if you will, pagan. And they didn't want paganism associated with father of our country, if you will. And so anyway, and they thought that the idea that he was bare-chested and, all of that kind of stuff, that did not go over well. In fact, the new republic, the United States of America, they would build their buildings in a neoclassical way, but depicting our leaders as Greek gods didn't go over well. Anyway, if you read up on this, you'll see about all of that. It's as it should be. It's in the National Museum of American History because it is part of American history. And so, let me get this. Okay, I get it. Open this up there. There. We can do that. this. This kind of summarizes what this next chapter is about. Chapter 8, Late Antiquity. And what is going on here? Well, let me tell you. This is Helena. And in many Christian denominations known as Saint Helena. And this is the cross that Jesus was crucified on. And so what we have here is some unknown guy digging, an early archaeologist here digging up crucifixes. And so let me tell you about this. Saint Helena, or Helena, was Constantine's mother. And when Constantine adopted Christianity as the official religion of the Roman Empire, moved the center of the Roman Empire to Byzantium and renamed it Constantinople in honor of himself. He did a lot of things to further the establishment of Christianity. It wasn't like he said, okay, we're the official religion, let it go. It was like Constantine and his mother, they did a lot to further the idea and the practice of Christianity. And one thing that Constantine did from Constantinople was that he sent his mother, Helena, to the Holy Land, to Jerusalem, to find and preserve all of the relics of Christianity. And so that's what this guy's doing. He's looking for crosses. This is being presented as the true cross. And other biblically significant, New Testament significant sites around the Holy Land. And that was her job. And she went and brought back a lot of stuff and preserved a lot of the stuff. Of course, it's 300 years after the life of Christ, but nevertheless, that was her job, and that's what she did. And so that's a print. I really wanted to use that as an introduction to this. And let me get to share screen. Let's share that one. See how it rolls, how it flies. That one, there we go. Double check, screen share. Very good. All right. Chapter 8, Late Antiquity. And so this is kind of an interesting map. We talked about how geography is part of the interdisciplinary aspects of art history. The Mediterranean world in late antiquity. And it doesn't really give us a date, but really you can say this is 4th, 5th centuries common era. And you can still see this Italian presence in Egypt, the Holy Land, Nicaea. We're going to talk about that big time. Constantinople, Byzantium, Istanbul in parentheses. So this is a city that's gone by different names. It's not uncommon for cities to be renamed. In the Soviet Union, they went and renamed a lot of cities after, like they made Leningrad out of St. Petersburg and so on. But at any rate, this would be Bosnia, Croatia, and all of the Slavic countries here on the Adriatic Sea, and Italy itself. But what you don't see on this map is Spain anymore, North Africa anymore, France, England, all of that. Basically, they're just still around the Mediterranean and with some inroads in what we call the Middle East. Just saying. And so its highlighted area includes the sites discussed in this chapter. It is not a distinct geographical or political region. And part of that, why they put that disclaimer on there, is that these boundaries are kind of fluid. We have Germanic tribes, we have Gauls, we have people from Persia, from North Africa. We got people from all over the place. And especially with Rome, a lot of tribes, if you will, come in and sack Rome, as we discussed. And so one of the important places in late antiquity, and I'll show you where that's at, Dura Europos, and a lot of times we just hear it as Dura. This is in Syria, modern day Syria, and this is a real kind of snapshot of the period we're in. Because before 320-ish, 323 Common Era, in much of the Roman Empire, Christianity was illegal. As we talked about, they throw Christians into the Colosseum for sport and feed them to the lions and so on. It was an underground religion for a long time, if you will. But this place here, the interior of a synagogue, who knows what a synagogue is? We have any Jewish friends here? Basically, a Jewish temple. And so what's interesting about this, and this is in Damascus, Syria, and much of it's still intact. What we have here are pictures painted all over the walls of both Old Testament writings and New Testament writings. Of course, the New Testament hasn't fully been compiled yet at this point, but bottom line is it's Christian and it's Jewish. And if you will, early Christians, many of them were Jewish. Jesus was Jewish. And so anyway, it becomes kind of intertwined. It wasn't in some places not much of a distinction that you could actually be both Jewish and Christian. Part of that has to do with Christianity was not formalized yet. It was not particularly organized because it wasn't out in the open. It was still an outlaw underground religion. And so in certain places it was accepted, and in the synagogue we see this place, and it's both Christian and Jewish, and it's quite remarkable. And so here we go. Samuel anoints David. Detail of the main interior wall of the synagogue, Dura Europos. And so the painting itself, it's not quite as naturalistic as the stuff we've been seeing from Pompeii, from Greece, from Rome, etc. You see, this is 245, 256, common era. But the subject matter is Old Testament. And there is some kind of issue of scale here, which is kind of a throwback. What we saw in earlier depictions, both as friezes and as paintings, that the important person would be larger. So we start to see some of these old conventions start to come back. And this is tempera. It's a kind of paint that's uses egg actually as its vehicle. But bottom line, anoints David. You see David here. And David will be King David of Israel. And he is the guy who killed Goliath as a young man. So anyway, this is all biblical. It's all in the Old Testament. But bottom line is that we got depictions of this. And here's where the second commandment starts to be very important to the understanding of art for the next 1,500 years or so. What is the second commandment? That covers three major religions. Next. It's about graven images. Thou shalt not create or adore or venerate, a different language. Graven images, and that is that thou shalt not worship false idols. And so it was a problem that for centuries, artists and religion and religious figures tried to grapple with for a long, long time. We'll see this go on for even till today. Actually, there's a lot of ways of understanding the second commandment, even though it is pretty much widely accepted as foundational. So anyway, here's this painting, and the idea that we're actually seeing an illustration of a biblical event starts to bump up against the second commandment. And so how do you deal with that? Well, we'll see. And so, and here's some more pictures of what's left of Dura Europos, Syria. And this is in the Yale University Art Gallery. So, and so anyway, Judaism and Christianity, they kind of coexisted. In some ways, they are one and the same. This is the Ark of the Covenant and two menorahs painted in a wall of the Jewish catacomb. What is catacomb? It's an underground burial site. And Rome has many catacombs because that's how they treated their dead That's how they buried people, underground in the catacombs. But we know there's the Ark of the Covenant. This is it right here. It's what Indiana Jones was looking for. Still, bottom line, a lot of these stories out of the Bible they still inspire people to search for them. The Ark of the Covenant, obviously, Steven Spielberg, Raiders of the Lost Ark, but you know, and a lot of movies are made about this. The Holy Grail, the cup that held the wine that Jesus and their disciples drank from at the Last Supper, that is inspired. Splinters are pieces of the true cross, as I just showed you St. Helena looking for. Again, so anyway, the point being is that there's this kind of intersection between Christianity and Judaism for the first 300 years or so of Christianity. Another part of the catacombs. And this, they were talking about this in the book, that it was of a person who was probably of means, and it has some Christian iconography here, and I thought we could get to that, but it's still too small. Anyway, you'll see it in the book. This, I'm going to zoom in on this because this is actually a better example. So the second commandment is is interpreted in a different way. We don't see religious Jewish art, but in Christianity, we start to see it reemerge. And this is a picture of Christ as the Good Shepherd. And you see the lamb across his back. Well, they have other religious figures, and this one here, you know, I could only guess to some of this, but this looks like probably Jonah and the whale. This actually could be, I'm not sure, but where Christ and some of the disciples went out for fishing. They went fishing and the storm blew up. And Jesus told them not to be. Anyway, iconography, we start to see this as the way of dealing with the graven images, and that is that they would not be as much real as they are symbolic. The icon serves as a symbol. And so we'll see that. That's what chapter 8 is really all about, is this idea of Christianity making inroads and trying to establish itself. And so, sarcophagus with philosopher, orient, Old and New Testament scenes. And so, again, they're dealing with, and in this case, I'm thinking, I don't know all of this for sure, but this could be Adam and this could be the serpent. There's Jesus right here, Christ as Good Shepherd. This is a philosopher or a seer, maybe one of the prophets, talking about, I will send my son. I knew you before you were born. You will send us a Savior, etc. Over here, We see early iconography of my Christians over here. What is that thing? Right here. Sing the Gospels. On the wings of the snow white dove, he sends his pure, sweet love. The Holy Spirit, symbolized as a dove. And so, anyway, there's a lot of religion in this. And this is a later catacomb. And so, look, this is like really kind of cool because this is purely Christian. And we start to see the development of the iconography that'll be used for a long time, or like a millennia, or even more, even today. And so who do you figure this guy is? See the halo? That's an artistic invention. That is something to designate, to symbolize this figure from the other two, and the halo means that this is the holy person. Now we'll get into periods of time where anyone who's venerated in Christianity will get a halo, but early on, this is it, Jesus. And you'll see oftentimes Jesus holding a book, which is the Old Testament, the Bible, if you will, and open to a page. Of course, we can't read that, but open to a page where the prophets said that he will come. God will send a Messiah. And so this is the evidence, and you can see these two figures. He's the guy. He's the center of attention. He's the center. Let me show you this one too, because this is really kind of cool in its own right. Now you would recognize this, I think, more as a Jesus portrait, because over time the iconography changes as it develops and will for a long time be standardized as what we call this Byzantine art. But what are some of the characteristics of this that would designate this as being Jesus? Because this is really kind of more like what you see today. Okay, not talking, eh? Let me tell you. Beard. You know, that was a big thing. They didn't know how to portray Jesus because he died as a young man at the age of 33. So would you put a beard on him or not? Well, they finally settled on a beard, but a beard could represent a number of things. It could represent age, which is why they chose, like many chose not to give him a beard. On the other hand, it could indicate wisdom. And in many parts of the world still today, men wear beards, and it is a sign of wisdom. And we still talk about that, still in our language, if you will. You ever heard of a old professor being called a graybeard? Say I'm an academic circle. So that means like you're an old professor. And see, I got a gray beard too. You know, bottom line, a gray beard. That means that you're old and wise. And so anyway, they settled for the wisdom of the beard. And again, I just told you about the halo as the invention. What is this? And this is a little different than it's usually portrayed. I am the Alpha and Omega. Of course, this looks like a double Omega. It's kind of different, but bottom line, these are indicators. They are part of the iconography. And so here we got a sarcophagus, and it does give a number of biblical scenes. And I'm trying to figure out, because I just read about this a little while ago, different kinds of iconography. And so, see where I have this pointed here? What we start to develop is iconography that represents the writers of the four Gospels. And so I'm sure, no, that's not it. This is Daniel being fed to the lions. And this, get it. What's it? Adam and Eve, exactly. So these depictions have survived long enough that you guys you actually know what's going on here. And I believe this is a young Jesus, but and you see, because he's sitting on a throne, and it's a young Jesus, no beard. But again, no, that's not him. You know who this is? Let me tell you. I didn't notice this. The head of Goliath. This is David. This is young King David. And having the scrolls here indicate that this is part of Scripture, and so on. But anyway, you see the Bible stories. Here's Christ as a good shepherd. And as I said, we're really trying to figure out what the iconography is. And like I was struggling with that last slide, you got to really know the iconography in order to understand what the picture is. And so chapter 8 has a kind of a big section on these holy figures and the people who are actually represented. And it's a pretty good guide to this. And so Christ as the good shepherd, that was for a long time the accepted image of Jesus. And so Christ seated, again, that's what I was talking about before, the idea that Christ would be on a throne. That has problems too. I mean, it symbolizes royalty and leadership and veneration, but it also flies in the face of some other aspects of Christianity. For example, my kingdom is not of this world. He said, you know your Bible. And so Jesus in his lifetime was poor. He was not royalty, didn't command great armies. And so these are the kind of issues that they struggle with for a long time in early Christianity. And so they're coming out, it's official, they're not underground anymore. And so this is the Anastasis Rotunda of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. And this is looking from above here, and these are the worshipers, but I'm going to talk about the Holy Sepulchre. This is a site identified by St. Helen, and they built this 326, 335, Common Era. Doesn't have an architect here, but if it did, it could likely be under the direction, it was under the direction of Helena, Mother of Constantine. And she identified this as a holy site. And this is where they think Jesus was buried, the sepulchre. Now, there are other archaeologists now that are saying, well, you know, that may or may not be true, but for 4th century archaeology and artifact identification, she did what she could. And so what we get here too is this kind of idea about if we got Christianity and we build churches, what should they look like? And so this is Old St. Peter's, and it's got the mosaic tiles and it's got the decoration and stuff. But Santa Costanza, one of the early, this was intended to be a mausoleum for Constantine's daughter, and it ended up being a church. But what they do is that they borrow quite heavily from Roman architectural design. And so you see the columns, Corinthian columns, we see the deep barrel arches, and we see what they would call this a rotunda, and on top a dome. This is not too different from what we saw earlier with the Pantheon, except it's smaller in scale. And you see here, there's the altar, probably originally meant to hold a sarcophagus of Santa Costanza, but as it was converted into a church, this is an early, very early Christian church. I want to point out something here too. See these? See these chairs? Early Christian, and in fact all the way up through medieval times, churches did not have pews or chairs or a place to sit. People attending a service such as a mass or a baptism, confirmation, weddings, whatever, were expected to stand. And so this is kind of a newer interpretation. So they just have portable chairs that they move out there for church services. But you'll see, even how many of you are familiar with the Sistine Chapel in Rome, the Vatican? Michelangelo painted the ceiling famously. Well, that is a chapel, but it has no pews. It's like this. And if you have mass there, I'll bring out some folding chairs for those who can't stand, but stand or kneel, I might add. And a lot of religions still don't put pews, benches in their places of worship. For instance, a mosque, you would bring your prayer rug, take off your shoes, and pray. It's not pews, not chairs, not like this. And so here's another word you might want to know. It's called an ambulatory. And this is not unique to Christianity. It's actually part of religious practice around the world. But an ambulatory basically is a walkway, a place where you would worship, and you see all of these places along the perimeter. They would hold statues, votive candles, maybe a kneeler so that you could pray, etc. Stations of the cross, and so on. Ambulatory, just when you amble, that means you walk. And so there's a mosaic inside this. You see, it's very elaborate. And so this is kind of a mix of a lot of this floral decoration, and here in the center, Christ. And this is a depiction of Christ. No beard. Like I say, none of this was standardized at the time. Christ as Sol Invictus. There he is. No beard. But we do, if you look carefully, you'll see the cross behind him as an indicator. And a mosaic. I wanted to kind of point this out too. I'm running short here. I want to get to a few things. Tempera on parchment. This kind of artwork is called manuscript illustration. So anybody know what a manuscript is? It's a book. It's an old book, but it's a book before they had printing press technology. And in those days, if you had a book, it had to be done by hand. From the same root word of manual labor, written by hand, manuscript. Script means writing or drawing, written by hand. And so this is a manuscript illustration. And you can see it's early 5th century. And this will become its own art form. It will follow Christianity, and many of the handwritten manuscripts, Bibles, for about 1,000 years. Plaque from a box. Interesting. Judas hanging himself because he betrayed Jesus and knew when he realized what he had done, when he killed himself. And we have here, this is the Roman centurion who pierces Christ's side with a spear. Mary, the mother of Jesus, likely here, St. John the Apostle. And so anyway, it's in ivory. Again, symbolism and meaning over naturalism. It's a struggle for a long time. This is finally how they standardize Christian churches. And it's very influenced by Rome. It's got the high windows. Again, to light this place up as much as anything. And you can see these are not like so much stained windows with depictions of scripture, and just they're basically windows that let light in. And again, no pews, no chairs. And this is Santa Sabina. Like I say, this becomes a model of Christian architecture for a pretty long time, for a couple of 100 years or so. And yeah, one of the things that they do, this is, on these early Christian churches, actually survives for a long, long time. And that is that they do low relief, just like all of the other cultures did. It was especially prominent on doors and entryways. We'll even see that in Gothic cathedrals and so on. And this is, again, this is the crucifixion. Jesus, again. The meaning, the symbolism, the idea that you can identify this. This is here to remind you why you're here. And so there's some mosaics, Santa Maria Maggiore. You can see we're working out some iconography here. This is, let me point this out. This is the adoration of the Magi. There's his mother Mary, there's Christ, the young Christ with the halo, and with not gold halos, but halo angels. And here are the Magi coming to bring their gifts from afar. And so this is a problem. In a way, Christ as king, but Christ as being born in a stable in very humble circumstances. So, they're struggling. They're going back and forth between symbolism and realism, and they're working out the iconography. And so here's Christ, I believe, in heaven with his disciples. But Abraham and Lot, Old Testament. So it should be in a lot of ways kind of an indication of why it is that the Christian Bible has an Old Testament and a New Testament. Much of the Old Testament is from Jewish religion, New Testament Christianity, but we still have them both. That's the same book. And so the idea that everything changed. A mosaic Christ as Good Shepherd, again, now he doesn't have a beard. He's got his cross, and he's got a halo. And we know the story of Christ as the Good Shepherd. And the miracle of the loaves and fishes. And this is in Ravenna, Italy. And I want to probably begin with that when we come back next week. We'll talk about Ravenna, because what happens is that in the early 6th century, we have an emperor from Constantinople. His name is Justinian. And he had a wife, Theodora, and it was their mission to come back and reunify and reclaim the Roman Empire. And as they did, they built churches, sponsored a lot of, commissioned a lot of artwork, and reestablished Christianity. And so a lot of this takes place in Ravenna because the Germans actually come down and they take over Ravenna and they occupy it. And so anyway, they're winning the battles in the Western Roman Empire. Just getting it. So, any questions? And if I ever, and I understand that where we're at now is really for a while here, religion will dominate the arts, period, for 1,000 years. And it'll be Judaism to some extent, but it'll be Christianity and Islam introduced later in the millennium. And so we have a chapter. If I get anything wrong about the religion, raise your hand and set me straight. Say. And there's a lot of different beliefs in Christian faith too. So anyway, if I say a thing that's wrong, let me know. I want to learn too. You guys can. Monday, 11 a.m. Be there. Have a good weekend.